Hello friends, welcome to UGC EPG Pathshala. Myself Dr. Taruna Bansal, Assistant Professor at the Department of Geography, Jamia Millia Islamia. Today I will discuss the concept of postmodern urbanism from the paper Urban Geography. Now before I start with this postmodern urbanism, I would like to just say something why this topic has been included in this particular paper. Now in most of the books what you will see when you talk of urban geography, we start with nature and scope of urban geography, we talk of how cities came up, that is history of cities, then we come to morphology of cities, that is the internal structure of cities, where we basically deal with the number of theories given by Burgers, Hoyt, Ullmann. We also talk of Christoller, we talk of rank size rule, we talk of primacy. And in recent times when the problems in urban areas have exaggerated and we as human beings, or rather man as a community is not able to address or solve the problems in urban areas, we have this component of urban environment where we deal with pollution, poverty, sprawl, everything. Now these are empirical foundation of urban geography. But if we have to theorize these problems, we have to go into the philosophy of urban geography. And when we say philosophy, we have to see how these philosophies have been incorporated in different branches of geography. So postmodernism as a concept has been accepted throughout the world in all the disciplines based in philosophy. So when we talk of postmodernism, we start with the concept. Now when I do here also, what I will do is I will start with what is postmodernism, what do I mean by postmodernism, but now since we are talking of geography, we will come to the next step and we will talk of postmodernism in geography. Now as again we are talking of urban geography, so we have to see, since urban geography is one of the most dynamic disciplines or other sub-disciplines of geography, we have to see how these philosophical theories influence each one of these branches. So we have to see how this whole concept of postmodernity is being visualized in urban geography when we have example of postmodernist city. And if you simply type on Google postmodernist city, the picture of Los Angeles will come. So why Los Angeles is being said as postmodernist city? Why it is different from a metropolis or a cosmopolitan city? That is the purpose of including this concept of postmodernism within urban geography. So we see, as I said, what is the meaning of postmodernism, postmodernism in geography, how urban geographies see postmodernism, and why we need to study the features of Los Angeles School of Postmodern Urbanism, and ultimately why it has failed. Now this is very interesting. Something came up, we all know, I will cite an example of quantitative revolution here. Revolution came, revolution was over. Was it? But is it really so? I was just reading one or two articles, very recent publications, 2009. People have started writing on return of quantitative revolution. So what happens when we talk of paradigms, it's like something came, but for some time it becomes dormant. Although I have used the term postmodernism has failed, but as an urban geographer I also have a hope that there is something in it that maybe it will revive. So we will see that from the perspective of Los Angeles School, and why critics are saying that it has failed. So I start with the introduction, which says what is the meaning of postmodernism in geography. The doctrine of postmodernity had a significant influence on human geography. Thus, expected consequences were likely to be there. Geography as a discipline focuses on the spatial distribution of phenomena or spatial expressions and their representation on the globe, which are also found in opposition to the grand narratives of the very principle upon which the whole edifice of modern episteme and thinking is erected. The core foundations of the modernism were radically questioned, and human geography with focus on space was not to be left out. So, geography in general was also bracketed under anti-foundationalism and insignia of postmodern era. Post-1980s saw distinguished and substantial changes in the subject. These changes were both due to responses to internet development within the subject, that means there were some developments within the subject, as well as the challenges which were thrown from the outside, that is other subjects were throwing on the geographers. Last decade of the 20th century saw a growing opposition to the geographers associated with the positivists and spatial analysis and the interpretation of the subject. However, precisely around the same time, some geographers, progressive geographers, were also talking about radical Marxist theories, who still had strong belief in the grand explanations and scientific analysis rooted in modernist tradition. These Marxists or radical critical theorists did give least importance to subjectivity. These geographers were basically dealing with the concept of social class struggle, and trying to universalize it, completely ignoring the context, the spatial dimension, as well as individual identities. Postmodern period, or even if it is called epoch, is characterized by new cultural logic and radical reconfiguration of the concept of space. Postmodernism, therefore, as Minsa in his Postmodernism geography reiterates, is not seen as a singular manifestation awaiting discovery and description of geographers. It was envisioned rather as a complex of diverse perspectives, processes and objects, a confused and convoluted collage of people and objects undecipherable with the analytical tools of the past. A postmodern geography would therefore involve a resistance to paradigmatic closure and rigidly categorically thinking, the capacity to combine creatively what in the past was considered to be unethical, uncombinable, the rejection of totalizing deep logics, that blinker out way of seeing, the search for new ways to interpret the empirical world and tear away its layer of ideological mystification. The early years of postmodern geography were punctuated with fresh focus on new sets of research questions. One such emerging field was the urban architect or design, later came to be known as postmodern city, idly represented through the manifestation of new urban landscape and distinct urban mosaic. The postmodern city of Los Angeles of Western United States became the new foci of research in urbanism as well as urbanization. The curious phenomena is no longer to be seen through the perspective of singular logic encompassing one exclusive definition of the style city. Instead, postmodern urbanism conceived city as a complex set of socio-spatial identity represented through its architectural designs in complete departure from the established norms, standards and engineering technologies representing the modern and the post-structural age. Along with the interest in the city, geographers trained their focus of research also on the broader changes occurring in the New Age society and hypothesized the advent of postmodern era. Thus, one can say that postmodernism is not an overnight revolution or a day's affair. It is something which had been banging our doors from the last 3 decades. We must get used to it. In human geography, per se, over time, it has become integral and indispensable part of the geographical literature. The most significant influence has been on urban geography, which dates back to 1980s, when in journal Environment and Planning, Society and Space, it published most of its articles on postmodern urbanism. Examples can be cited from the works of Deer's Postmodern Urban Planning and Soja's Los Angeles Postmodern Specialities, which laid a base in postmodern intellectual discourse within geography. For him, modernization is a continuous process of restructuring of the society that is influenced by a number of historical and dynamic geographical modes of production. These produce a society that has been recomposed both in time and space and is very much visible in concrete forms, especially when we talk of urban architect. According to him, the traces of postmodernity can be located in the late 1960s, along with the geographical restructuring that took three different paths of specialization: post-historicism, the resurgence of space in the ontological struggle; post-Fordynism, increasingly flexible disorganized regime of capital accumulation; and thirdly, postmodernism, accompanying cultural and ideological reconfiguration, changing how we experience social being. All of these are simultaneously needed to solve the geographical puzzle. He views the intellectual world and its life as a multi-layered system of created nodal regions, a configuration of differentiated and hierarchical organized locales. Such a life world includes various scales which initiates from human body through the urban and the nation state to the whole social world, and everywhere it is soaked with Foucault's power and authority. Some of the writings that established postmodernism as a tradition of inquiry was there in Harvey's Postmodernism and American City, David Lay's Postmodern Urbanism in Vancouver, Deere's Postmodern Challenge Restructuring of Human Geography, Gregory's Areal Differentiation and Postmodern Geography. It can be said that as a discipline, geography was washed by the postmodern wave. Here I would like to point out that all these, if you see the way these people have written, is very different from the urban geographers who were writing before them. So, if you see the literature of urban geography written in 1950s, 60s is very different when you read Harvey, when you read Soja, when you read Deere. So, we see that there is a paradigm shift in the way urban settlement is being looked on as. So, that is why as I said before also, we have to see the changes which are occurring, the way city is being perceived. I always say, I will cite an example of myself here. I always say that I am an urbane. If somebody says, oh, do you belong to a village, I will be like, what village? Throughout my life I have stayed in a city. So, a person associates, and here what Worth is talking about, that urbanism is a way of life. It is there on each individual who is associated with a city. I would like to be called as a Delhiite, right? I would not like to be called a person who has come from a second level town. And even that is why one of the reason we are seeing so many changes, so many transformation in urban area is that because we take urbanism as our own way of life. So, postmodernism or postmodern urbanism is also a similar thing. It is the way geographers perceived urban city. So, they came up with an example, so it was not something which they were talking in haywire, it was not something out of the box. Los Angeles as a city was an example right there saying that the concept of postmodern city exists. So, that is why we need to study how postmodernism influenced urban geography. This can be authenticated. How? Because there are a number of works which was writing, which had this consciousness. Three themes can be identified. So, the first is urban cultural landscape and placemaking, where we have number of literature of Anderson, Deere, Duncan, Thrift, Robbins, Shields, to name a few. I am not going to read all of these because it is already there in the text. So, the second theme was economic landscape of post-Fordism. Now, here I will just again tell you something about Fordism. What is Fordism? Now, if you see, Fordism has come up as a concept, as a paradigm. Why is that? Now, Henry Ford was a manufacturer of a car. He used to make big luxury cars. So, one day, because he was an entrepreneur and he wanted to profit, his main aim was profit maximization. So, one day he just thought, the cars which I am producing is for whom? And an idea struck to him that my employers are not buying the cars which they are producing. So, what is the use of producing such cars? So, he came up with the idea of small cars. So, now when the small cars came, his employees could afford them. So now what happened? The production increased manifold. So the profitization came. So the second thing we did was he came up with this conveyor belt technology. So in conveyor belt technology, what is specialization? So there was specialization in the economy, but in an unorganized way. Now what did this lead to? This lead to spatial division of labor. The third, and here again we have number of studies, I am not quoting them. The third was theoretical discourse which reference to space and linguistic disputes. So apart from these three themes, we had four other areas where there was some post-modernization consciousness there. These include, one is writings and literature, ethnographic writing, where we also have cartographic writings. There are a number of works done in cartography, which says that the postmodernism did occur, some even in art. The second theme is the politics of postmodernization, both historical and contemporary. Again, we have number of writings in which we have feminist geography, which had discontentment with postmodernism, but we are not dealing with that there. Then there is a lot of work on Orientalism, post-continentalism, and legal studies, which are part of this only. Then the third one is the emphasis on the construction of the individual and the boundaries of self, including human psychology and sexuality respectively. And the fourth topic is the reassertion of questions with regard to nature and environment. So we again come to the man-environment relationship, but from a postmodernist view. Now these all took many forms, including a new look on the relationship between place and health. Therefore, one can say that by 1991, postmodernism had acquired a definite place in geographical thinking, though it faced several contentions. Now we come to what is postmodern urbanism. This is the phenomena based on the return of middle income people from suburbs to cities. Often this is accompanied by gentrification, the upgrading of the older, run-down dwellings into modern and fashionable residences. Soja uses postmodernism in the context of a city to analyze the patterns that exist in the city as well as the historical processes that have resulted in these patterns. In the north, we are also seeing a significant outmigration of African Americans who started moving into northern cities in two huge waves, one following each of the world wars, and secondly, moving back to the south to rural and suburban areas. Postmodern urbanism includes the concept of infill. This refers to demolishing the older buildings in the city's core and replacing them with new commercial buildings or self-contained urban villages. These urban villages are designed to limit the use of automobile, thus helping to cut back on greenhouse gases that are causing global warming. Postmodern urbanism emphasizes on new concepts in architect, living space, and more open channels of communication among people. The concept of postmodern urbanism is based primarily on the assumption that the global capitalist economy has fundamentally transformed in its mode of production and in the relations of production. Such logic is imbued in the works of Deere and Flusty, with the distinction placed on Flexism as having fundamentally altered conventional political economy. The two trends identified within this are automation and greater freedom of capitalist enterprises. Automation refers to the natural revolutionizing of means of production, and the freedom of enterprise in this case refers to the ability to circumvent barriers, regulations, and other constraints such as distance and commitments to establishing equilibrium with labor and capital. The specific configuration of Fordism suited the needs of the capitalist class at that particular time. However, it was also contingent on the relative pressure being asserted by the combined forces of production, which was labor and the power they could exercise in negotiating for a better position. The creation of the welfare state functioned to allow capitalism to continue while allowing certain concession to the working class. Postmodernism, as it intersects with the rise of neoliberal economic doctrine, occupies the same ideological tendency in that both proclaim the end of history triumphantly, and they seek to obscure the predations of capitalism. The trend which Schiermeier highlights about the negation of the very purpose to seek knowledge closely relates with Fukuyama's thesis on the end of history, coinciding with the end of the Cold War and resulting in the universal victory of democratic liberalism. In this view, the questions have already been settled over who is right and wrong. Therefore, postmodernist discourse adopts a moral relativist cause. This is supported in ideology, but it also affected in practice by the means capital asserts its authority in imposing policies which further the interests of accumulation within a realm that can be controlled and conducive to further accumulation. Harvey's theory is based on the triad of space, time and money and emphasizes that the fragmentation of flexible accumulation is stimulated in the dispersion of politics, philosophy and social thinking. But when he talks of postmodern urbanism, he concentrates only on the global level and emphasizes on architect and urban design in relation to spaces of consumption. For Deere, we live in the world of postmodern consciousness and thus it is of no use ignoring it. He opines that the books of Soja and Harvey has demolished the vibrancy of this discourse and even led to its premature death. This is because both the writings are undemocratic and monological, as their synthesis is inadequate and incomplete to answer the raised questions. He stresses that postmodernism is more about complication and difference or variation, which is very aptly reflected in the urban architecture, as an urban landscape presents a blueprint for the social world where localization and fragmentation of social world is clearly visible. Thus, a postmodern city is a space where conventional institutions of control, authority, power and organization are not visible anymore, and at the same time no new modes of control or authority have taken their place. This has created a vacuum which is being filled by the new emerging socio-cultural, political and economic relationships. Now, when we talk of postmodern urbanism, as I already said, we have to speak for Los Angeles School of Urbanism, postmodern urbanism, and this has been a subject of debate. Schermerhorn examines research approaches used by different schools, pointing to the superiority of scientific method in establishing transparent, meticulous and reproductive analysis. The Chicago and Los Angeles school can be contrasted on the basis of analysis, while Schermerhorn acknowledges that the Los Angeles school has its own way of acquiring knowledge. He points to the depth and volume of research conducted by the Chicago school and its relative utility. The advancement of a theory of random capitalism simply does not follow empirical evidence. He specifically attacks the postmodernist Los Angeles school on two contentions. First, the polyvocality approach of the school, which seeks to give all voices equal agency, and secondly, the ethical questions of determining which narratives are right and which are wrong. If all things are equal, there is no point in studying further. He concludes that this inability to have an effective epistemological basis prevents the Los Angeles school from making real strides in scientific evidence-based research. Curry and Kenny analyzes the standpoints of Los Angeles schools in its ability to interpret economic and social statistics and apply them effectively in the field of study. So we see that how Chicago school was very different to Los Angeles, and this school says that the city is being shaped more than it is shaping the global economy. Insofar as resistance is concerned, the research into political action and organizing are weak at best. Actual prospect of revolution are totally absent from discourses. The lack of agency which is attributed to actors in the models presented by the school, because they do fall neatly in the utopian and dystopian dichotomy where all power resides with an implacable elite. The practical utility of the school is undermined by its inability to understand concrete conditions. Effective political action rests in the ability to appreciate agency and cultivate class consciousness to mobilize forces. To conclude, Deere and Flusty present some interesting point when they bring the discourse on postmodernism in geography, but they have failed in their attempt, as the arguments put forward are neither coherent nor convincing. Rather, at some places they become self-contradictory. The main aim was to establish the Los Angeles School of Postmodern Urbanism, and the purpose was to bring a new light in urban geography, but it fails to generate even little heat and leads to the creation of lot of smoke that shadows the basic understanding of cities. This is because the whole premise is based on a dubious assumption that a society has moved from a modern to a more or a postmodern era. One may agree with Sui, who states that postmodern urbanism may reveal the failures of postmodernism in its way of providing possibilities for a radical breakthrough in geographical thinking. Postmodern urbanism has rather built its own coffin, as it neither provides a new vision nor a new city, but only a new style. Thank you.